Myths still survive to this day. They are still a part of our cultural foundation. And while they may have less to do with gods, goddesses, and divine things, they still have plenty to say about heroes, monsters, origins, and morals. The point is that even in an age where technology, science, and reason have become like the driving forces in our culture, humans still explain some of life's mysteries with fantastical or unconventional stories. Humans love stories. We love it when some sort of narrative or idea makes us feel a certain way. And sometimes a crazy story is a more attractive alternative to the boring truth. This is why we appreciate myths. One of the reasons we study myths in class is that they help us construct a view of a period of ancient history. Ancient Greece is a history steeped in mythology. And while we don't pretend that they're necessarily true stories that we are looking at in this unit, they still shape our understanding of that time period. The images of gods and heroes in fantastic settings give us an understanding of what was important to these people at that time and how their values and virtues have been influenced by this culture from the past. Isn't that inaccurate, you may ask? Why aren't we studying the facts about ancient Greek history rather than these wild stories? What does it matter what they believed or what they made up? Isn't it more important to understand what actually happened? Yes, that is important. However, literature in the modern world owes quite a bit to these stories from Greek mythology. You can't completely understand the basics of literature without having a basic understanding of Greek mythology. These stories are full of themes that we'll be dealing with all year, and you'll see them in much of the reading that you do outside of class. They can inform us about how to think and how to live by showing us heroes and villains and victims and the way they dealt with their situations. They actually have a lot to tell us about morality, ethics, and virtues. And they do this by using archetypes. These are types of characters or patterns that seem to represent a universal theme. An archetype is a literary device that employs the use of a famous concept, person, or theme to express a message or a meaning. The psychologist Carl Jung talked about archetypes a lot. He implied that there are different types of characters that, seem to show up over and over again in stories, and that these characters exist because they are something that's deeply rooted in the human mind and in the human soul. This is why archetypes are immediately identifiable. There are too many to list here, but we'll be discussing them throughout the class. A great example I can give you right now off the top of my head is Yoda. He's an archetype of what's called the mentor character. His primary purpose in the film is to teach and to be a stabilizing force in the chaotic battle raging in the rest of the galaxy. We look to this character not as only a great character in its own right, or even just as the first Muppet everyone took 100% seriously. He's a character we reference when discussing wisdom, understanding, or being a great teacher, or even things like patience or honesty, or overcoming physical limitations, obviously. And he's a character that taps into something we all sort of understand intuitively. Those kind of patterns, or at least how we've understood them through Western literature, are all rooted in Greek mythology. And more than just our understanding of the world and the influence it has on literature, Greek mythology is everywhere in Western culture. And I mean everywhere. Apollo was the god of the sun in Greek mythology, and the first US mission to the moon was called Apollo 11. High school track teams will often be represented by the image of the winged sandal, and this is a reference to Hermes, who is the messenger of the gods and also the god of athletics. Sending tributes to fight to the death wasn't an idea invented by the Hunger Games. It originated in the Greek myth of Theseus. Wonder Woman is literally a Greek god, and there are references to Greek mythology all over her stories. If you look closely enough, you'll see these references everywhere in pop culture and everywhere in Western literature. They are the original heroes from which many of our modern mythological heroes or superheroes derive a lot of their influence. And finally, we study Greek myths because they give us the ability to see what our culture may look like to those who study it in the future. I know this gets like a little bit complicated, and maybe it's not fair to compare our culture that's so immersed in information to like the relative simplicity of the Greek myth. However, these stories that we tell and that we treasure will become our legacy for our time in history. People in the future will look back at us and look back on our nation and our society and our time period and sort of judge it based on the stories that we tell, not just what we've left down as written history, but what we show our values to be through the stories that we pass down to each other. We'll be judged through what we've put down as the dominant stories in our culture, and this will determine what people in the future may think about how we acted and what we valued. Now, to you, it may have never really crossed your mind what people in the future will think of the stories of our day and age, but we tend to let the myths of The ancient Greeks influence what we think of their culture. It kind of influences our entire understanding of the ancient Greeks. It's hard to separate the mythological elements of Greek history from the actual Greek history. Studying myths will help you consider why those stories were needed at that particular point in history, what kind of stories we're producing now, and what we can do to represent ourselves accurately and virtuously to future generations. We can also consider how our stories hold up against the Greek myths. These myths have stood the test of time, and it's interesting to compare them to the stories we think are our finest representations of the state of our culture. Will Yoda be remembered as long as Zeus or Hercules? Only time will tell.